So this week, we're going to dig into data and really lay the foundations for using data, with um, people beyond your position. So many of you are probably classroom teachers or have been in positions that you're used to just looking at your own data. And so we're going to want to move from looking at our own data to thinking about, how do we then, plan for collecting data? How do we plan for analyzing and using data? How do we plan for the interpretation? And then how do we make sense of the data? And so that's really the goal of this week is to really lay the foundation for you and in thinking about the ways in which the data is useful to you beyond the classroom. But just to be clear on that. The PowerPoint, if you didn't already see, is available for you to download. And so if you want to print and pause and write along, you certainly can do that. And again, this video, you should be able to turn on closed captions as you see fit. I'm going to disappear now so I can put the content full screen for you. So this week's objectives, really thinking about this idea of using assessments for multiple measures and really, beyond PSSAs. We will spend some time talking about large scale data, but we really want to be thinking about, kind of the small formative assessments that teachers use and all the way up to larger, more benchmark assessments. We want to really think about, if you look at course objective 3, not just using one, right? And, that you're looking at maybe PSSAs alongside of a reading level or, a math test, depending on, what data you're working alongside with a teacher with. But we want to make sure that the assessments we're using are developmentally appropriate. And we know, if your district or if a district is using a Basel series, sometimes the assessments that come along with that aren't always responsive to the age of a child. And so, if I'll use the example of kindergarten when it's really not looking to do a benchmark um, reading assessment at the beginning of kindergarten because most students aren't reading at the beginning of kindergarten. They're still working on letters, sounds, or developing a concept of word to know that they point to one word for each word on the page. So having them sit and do a reading assessment may not be the most effective um, for and most developmentally appropriate. We want to think about technology, so really objective 4. So think about, one of the activities that you'll do this week is really an assessment inventory. But are there assessments that you or any of your colleagues are using that are with technology? For example, something as simple as a Socrative or a Google form where you could collect responses from students very quickly and be able to look at the results because there's a right answer and you can see who got it or who didn't. We know that in elementary level, sometimes that's a little easier with one class. But perhaps if you're a secondary teacher, if you're having students write responses in small groups, perhaps you could have all of your students in a Google Doc writing the responses, and you as the teacher, or you could coach a teacher on how to go between the various Google Docs and Google Classroom to monitor, who's writing, who's adding to this content, and is the group, on track. And so that's a way that you can, be more effective in assessing students rather than, kind of waiting until the test or the quiz to turn it in and take them home and grade them all. That we can do more now with technology, and we should start taking advantage of that. We want to be thinking about multiple assessment strategies. So, if, we we think about we can show mastery of students learning in the curriculum in more than one way. So if a student can't write a well-developed essay because they perhaps have writing challenges, could you have them record it or dictate it so that you can still assess the content that the student has, right? So we want to just be thinking about, you know, having a plan that is more comprehensive than just one kind of assessment. Because if we're only giving one kind of assessment, then that's really all then the school would value. So what we measure tends to be what's valued. So if we really focused on content, if you think about that example with writing, that being able to communicate effectively is important. And we could perhaps move beyond the printed word to allow a student to demonstrate that mastery. We will spend, there's a last part of class where we will talk about some statistical terminology just to get you oriented on some terms that you're going to see in reports and some terms that you're going to want to be able to help um, your teachers with understanding assessment results, both kind of benchmark, summative ones, as well as those day-to-day formative ones. And then lastly, you know, we want to move um, you know, we want to teach you how to move beyond just explaining the data to teachers, right? So when we get our assessment results, we explain the data and what it means to our teachers. And perhaps you can think about your own experience with your own faculty or past where, someone's sharing assessment results with you. And hopefully then we can start moving you to a place where you could coach a teacher to look at assessment and start to become reflective and be able to start explaining the data to themselves. And so that's really, objectives that we want to start getting you to think about this week. So the agenda for this week, you hopefully have already done this first part here with the course and syllabus overview. Right now you are watching the introduction, and then there's part two where we'll get into data analysis and structures that are going on in your own setting. We'll talk about setting the tone and taking stock. So the agenda really for the course is really those first few chapters in your DataWise book and kind of just bringing to life some of the things that the authors addressed in the course text and in the article that you read with some more specifics, with some activities in between that you'll be able to use in addition your assessments later in the course. So our essential questions this week. We want to think about the role of data collection in the 21st century and the ethical implications of those assessments, right? So we know that once we collect data, if you're not familiar with it, there's a child find law. So once we know that the data exists and where a student is, that we need to do something about it. So well, we know that once we have that data, we have to do something. That means we need to be responsive. And it doesn't mean that, one assessment's the end all be all, but there's certainly some implications that we want to be thinking about. So we're going to be looking to answering these two questions this week. So what are some problems of practice? So I think it's a good place to start. Here is acknowledging some of the issues around assessment and data in your schools. And so it's important, if you keep in mind, looking at this comic here, that all the teachers, the parents, the administrators, students, they're all coming to the table with a different perspective. And so, as a coach or somebody kind of leading people through that process, you're going to want to be thinking about how you're kind of bringing everyone to the same place. And, we looking at this all in the same way and acknowledging the different perspectives perhaps can provide the rest of us with a different understanding. So, that being said, we know that the first problem of practice really is this idea that, what knowledge are people bringing to the table, right? And not everyone has that knowledge to understand what does the test mean, and what is that going to mean for me as the classroom teacher looking at the results. We know that sometimes data can be overwhelming, and so data teams might start getting into the analysis process and get sidetracked, and so that can be an issue when we're looking at data. We know that there's a varying range of peer and administrative support, right? So you might be using data in your classroom and get all excited about it, but the person next door to you is thinking, "Yep, I'm good. I don't need to worry about that." And the one thing I would say to you is if you're in a situation where you have teachers like that, you want to be thinking about the fact that students are moving from adult to adult over the course of 1 year, but also the course of multiple years. And so if you have one teacher who's kind of off using their own data, is that really helpful then to the school or to the system that you're in so that the students are successful regardless of who the adult is in front of them? And we know that our administrators often get pulled throughout the day for various things, and so we could have this focus on using data and working through to set goals for our kids, for our school. But on a they have a parent show up at their door who's upset about X, right? Or there's a discipline issue. So or some principals are just busy. So we want to be thinking about how can we create structures that involve all of us and that we have norms for the work that we're doing. We know implementation can be an issue, that sometimes the message, when delivered from the top, gets reinterpreted by the time it gets to the front lines with the teacher. So, what a teacher thinks they're doing to follow a goal or an initiative set by the school may not be what was actually intended. I actually did my dissertation on this one, and it is, administrators misinterpret for what the central office intended, and then they give a message that's different to their teachers sometimes. And so we want to be thinking about being clear about what does it look like to do the work of analyzing data and setting goals. Um, we know that data can help measure effectiveness. However, we have to be thinking about is what we say we're measuring what we're actually measuring. So if you want to know how quickly your students can perform their math facts, but you're asking them to write them within a minute, you have to ask yourself, if a student doesn't meet a benchmark, is it because they don't know the math facts, or is it because they couldn't write quick enough? And so we want to just be careful about what we're measuring and how we're measuring that. You want to be thinking about the use of data in meaningful ways. So if you think about your work as a reading specialist, when you have gone through your program or are going through your program, you start looking for patterns. You look across data sets and you look across levels within one set of data, and you look for patterns to really get a sense of what's going on. And lastly, you want to be thinking about building capacity within your colleagues. And so getting everybody to, like I said earlier, going from being, the delivering the message on the assessment results to moving teachers to be able to use the assessment themselves to understand what's going on. And of course, this last one, there are people who see data as a curmudgeon, right? And that it's something that's being done to them. And we want to be thinking about getting them to see the value in the data. And so we'll talk about that throughout this week. And finally, we know characteristics of effective schools, right? That their programs are coherent from adult to adult, year to year, that there's collaboration within the schools, and that they're actually planned for. We look at all the data, but we also look at the limitations of that data and what it's not telling us, what demographics, perhaps are not part of that discussion, or you know so forth. And we want to be thinking about, those lifelong skills beyond just taking a test. And we want to be developing our students as critical thinkers. So there's a link to end this part of class. If you click on it on D2L, it'll take you to the website that looks like this. So you're just going to post some activities that you're doing in your class. If you just hit plus here, you get a post-it note. Type in a name of an assessment, why you administer it, and how the data is used. And just to get a sense of what's going on in your schools and across the various settings of our class.